Chapter 2. On the stuttering bus, Lainey moved through a living postcard. Vegetation grew any place there was dirt. Trees shaded lush grass. Between faded green limestone buildings, she caught glimpses of the towering mountains on the far side of the lake. She distracted herself with the scenery so she wouldn't have to think about the next 4 months of pet care. But it was an internship and a foot in the door. At the Montreux bus stop, she descended to a cobblestone street in an older part of town. Densely packed houses with clay tile roofs and textured limestone walls darkened by soot and time crowded the sky. At her building, exoskeleton pipes hung on the exterior walls. Dank smells of many feet and years of wear were trapped in the matted carpet on the inside stairs. In her apartment, a mattress sat on the wood floor. No other furnishings. A small kitchenette hid under a window on the far side. She grinned at the thought of at least a shower in her own bathroom after her transit. At least she had her own private space. First order, wash up. She unzipped the big suitcase. Her $1,000 wardrobe, specially purchased for this internship, would ensure she would be professionally dressed. For a second, she stared, not recognizing the contents. Oh no! She seized a man's checked flannel shirt and aftershave. An unfamiliar smell wafted up. Oh no, this isn't my bag. There was no claim check. A small tag read, Hector Getty. Great. Sorry, Hector. She wasn't sure how the mix-up happened. It was the only black suitcase on the carousel. At least she could shower, and perhaps borrow a flannel shirt for tomorrow. Except nobody looked good in flannel. Okay, maybe some fashion models and hot guys in winter catalogs with broad shoulders, boots, and steamy mugs, and most Canadians. But without her other luggage, she didn't have, gulp, clean underwear. Dripping wet from her shower, she rummaged around in her carry-on to find her emergency pair of underwear. A word about these panties. They were her least attractive pair, the pair she wore on her dates with her ex-boyfriend Aaron to make sure they didn't go all the way. The baby pink granny pants covered all her cheeks except for a hole in the unraveled seam in the bum side of the crotch. Just wearing them was degrading, but a fresh pair would feel so good and a must after a shower. She slid them on. No one was going to see her underwear anyway. It was only for a day. After a small nap, she would search for fresh underwear. After catching a late bus to the Gare, she discovered nearly everything closed before 8 at night. She bought a dinner of Alpine Foods orange almond chocolate at Alberto's, a 24-hour convenience store at the entrance to the train station, and a phone card to call home. First, she needed to call the airline to exchange her bag. She found the customer service number from her ticket and called with her cell phone to arrange a swap at her work. Apparently, Hector had taken the wrong bag. Next, she needed to call Nadine. She had a lot of explaining to do. A large blue space-agey phone booth lit up the sidewalk. With shaking fingers and a chocolate bar hanging from her mouth, she slid in the prepaid card and dialed Nadine, hoping she would answer a foreign number. "Nadine, I'm so glad you picked up," she said as soon as Nadine answered the phone. "Lainey, what's wrong?" She didn't know what to say. She pressed her head on the keypad, making it beep. Everything is going wrong. Things often go wrong in foreign travel. Why didn't you tell me Alpine Foods canceled my internship? Pause. Are you in Sweden? I'm in Switzerland, Nadine. Oh yeah, Sweden, Switzerland, same thing, she giggled. I just couldn't tell you. You worked so hard to get this internship. You wanted this since we were 9 years old. I hoped if you just showed up, they'd give you the internship. How could one be mad at a best friend when she was so well-intentioned? One must forgive. Someday. But today was not that day. Did you get the internship? Not the internship. An internship. Lainey explained Monsieur Clermont's impromptu interview and surprising offer to hire her. Nadine's voice brightened. See? I told you it would all work out. It's not in chocolate. What department is it in? Pet care. Alpine Foods had a finger in every foodstuff imaginable. Water, crackers, soda, baby food, confectionery, chocolates, dog food, cat food, canned goods, dry goods, frozen and refrigerated meals, manufactured and sold on nearly every continent inhabited by man, and fate dealt her pet care. With your history and all, working in pet care will be awful. No, it was awful not to tell me. Anyway, it's really stressful living in a country where I don't really speak the language. I told you they speak Swedish, not French. Lainey sighed. Nadine continued. Martin says... She was always quoting Martin, her cool but nerdy Star Trek-loving boyfriend, majoring in computer science at Stanford. He said he wrote some linguistic program utilizing a highly optimized recurrent neural network. He said it was the new hotness in speech processing for machine learning, whatever that meant. Sorry to interrupt. I only have 20 francs left. How do I get a stellar recommendation for chocolate? Lainey, you're smart and resourceful, prepared for everything. You'll get it. Lainey didn't feel prepared for this. 10 francs left. I'm making so many mistakes. You've always kept your notebook of things to improve. Write the unexpected things and how to fix it. You've always learned from your mistakes. Okay. She had bought a notebook at Alberto's. But I'll need another one, or a bigger one, with lots of pages. 4 francs left on the phone. I have to go. Before you go, Nadine shouted into the phone, I have to tell you, we're engaged. Martin asked me and we're getting married. Engaged? She was engaged? Lainey was about to congratulate her, but the line was cut. A soothing French female voice asked her to deposit more money or be cut off. When she didn't respond, the voice thanked Lainey for using the Swiss phone company. She held the red receiver, reading the amount of change left on her card. 72 centimes. A sinking pit formed in her stomach when she slid the card from the slot. She leaned against the edge of the glass, a lump lodged in her throat. The weight of 1,000 plaques of chocolate pressed on her. Her breath halted in her chest. Perhaps she should stand in the phone booth until the oxygen gave out, then suffocate and die. Her nose tingled, and she sneezed. Full-blown tears fell from her eyes. On the way back to her room, she checked the morning bus schedule, sandwiched in the plexiglass at the bus stop. Once home, she listed in her mini notebook what had gone wrong since she arrived. In no particular order. Number 1. Internship canceled. Probably should have quadruple checked. Number 2. Forgot my French. All 4 years of it. Should have bought the language program and practiced on my flight instead of watching TV. Number 3. Spent all my Swiss francs. I'll at least get reimbursed. Number 4. Flight delayed. Not sure how I could have prevented a delayed flight. New goal. Make enough money to own a private jet. She crossed it out. That was the chocolate talking. Number 5. Pet care. Jet lag plagued Lainey when the alarm went off the next morning. The sun hadn't crested the mountains, and Lake Geneva was a calm sheet of reflective glass when Lainey stumbled down the cobblestone road between the limestone buildings toward the bus stop. Foggy haze surrounded her. Moisture saturated the air. It clouded the light. She had 3 minutes until the bus arrived. Thank goodness for Swiss punctuality. At 7:38, she glanced down the street, biting her lip. She didn't see a lumbering bus parting the fog. 7:40 came. She glanced again at the chart posted between the plexi. For the first time, she noticed a paper taped near the timetables, curled in the moisture. With a finger, she pinned it down to read. A grève? Today? Dread grew in her stomach. A strike. There would be no buses today. Parking the suitcase, she opened her phone to call. But before she dialed, a steel gray sports car with a trident on the grille parked alongside her. Odd for this shoddy neighborhood. Must be lost. Then the power window sank into the door. Her stomach sank too. Mademoiselle Peterson? Her heart stopped. She ducked her head to see inside the luxury car. Monsieur Clermont. Eve had little patience for the American this morning, no matter how impressive her interview was yesterday. Why was she wandering the street with her suitcase? Get in, he said in English, unsure of her fluency in French. Americans rarely spoke another language well, even if learned at university. Perhaps they never had the opportunity to practice. I've already been up to your apartment searching for you. Je suis désolée. At least she knew how to apologize in French. It was a start. Didn't Sabine tell you I was picking you up this morning? No. She slid across the leather interior. Eve stowed her bag in the back. Once she was in the car, he jerked the gear shift. He glanced at the clock. He had several phone calls to make. The tires ground across the cobblestone in a forced U-turn. He scrutinized her outfit. The oversized plaid shirt drowned her pleasing figure. You cannot go to work in those clothes. Where did she think she was employed? A lumber mill? He bit back a smile. I don't have anything else, she said. My suitcase. There was a mix-up. The airline is exchanging them at work. That would explain the valise. Eve couldn't withhold an impatient sigh. The Swiss Airlines were supposed to be the finest in the world. They headed down the shaded streets to Centreville while he plunged them into the darkness of a parking garage near a huge, glass-sided department store. You can pick up something here. He dialed his phone while they opened the car doors. Heading toward the store, Eve locked the car with a beep while conversing with Madame Dreyfus, the plant manager in Fribourg. His tongue struggled with German. Mademoiselle Peterson entered and stopped, presumably stunned by the sumptuous displays of color and fabric, overwhelmed by decent fashion. Quickly, he urged her, through Madame Dreyfus's direct questions and scintillating opinions of dog food management. Mademoiselle Peterson selected a skirt and a few shirts to try on. Still in conversation, Eve followed her into the fitting room to the bench opposite her cubicle, making use of this lapse of time. He glanced up as the fitting room curtains swallowed her. She wasn't beautiful, not by European standards, Not tall and thin, no showy features, but she had just enough curves in all the right places. Madame Dreyfus's German shook him from his thought. He said goodbye to her after resolving her concerns and called Hiroko about the new merger deal. From Mademoiselle Peterson's fitting room, something fell to the floor with a clank. Eve glanced up to see if she needed help. Instead of her face peering through the curtains, a bum, clothed in pink, except for a small unraveled seam, split the panels. His eyebrows rose in surprise. Then Eve dropped his head, his face burning a bit. Did she see him? He didn't mean to see. Heavens knew he could never mention it. He faced away to bite his tongue. It was the first laugh he'd had in a long time. Lainey shot upright, red-faced and embarrassed. She hugged her phone, which had fallen from her pocket, to her chest. Did he see? Mustering her courage, she peeked through the parted curtain, grasping both panels between her hands. But Monsieur Clermont bowed his head, speaking a Far Eastern language on the phone across from her, his face hidden from view. Did he see or didn't he? Disconcerted, she drew the curtains closed again. Was his head down the whole time, and she had nothing to worry about? She chewed her lip. She certainly couldn't ask him about it. After trying on all the outfits, she found a flattering ensemble, complementary to her reddish hair. She tucked her old clothes under her arm and parted the stall curtains. Much better. His eyes lingered a tad longer than necessary. His approval warmed her. Your watch? What about my watch? It doesn't work. But then he returned to his phone, speaking now in Spanish. She glanced at the watch. It kept perfect time. Lainey shrugged. Occupied in conversation, Monsieur Clermont followed her to the cashier where the clerk scanned the tags, still hanging from her clothes, bagged her used articles with more than a bit of repulsion, and calculated the total. Monsieur Clermont, phone still at his ear, proffered a card from a sleek billfold. Lainey shook her head. With a short nod, he backed away from the cashier desk to continue his conversation. From her bag, she removed her wallet and slid her bank card through the reader. Declined. She tried again. Nothing. She handed it to the clerk to slide manually. She ran it through the machine. Again, nothing. Next, Lainey handed her a credit card. Rejected. She squinted her eyes shut in embarrassment, her nose tingling. She had called the bank to inform them she was in a foreign country. Did she give them the wrong dates? Or maybe they heard Sweden. Either way, Lainey's bank probably thought her card was stolen. She'd already used all the Swiss francs she exchanged on the expensive and unexpected train and bus fares yesterday, and the chocolate the night before. As the cashier asked her if she had any other way to pay, Lainey sneezed, closing her burning eyes. When she opened them, Monsieur Clermont was handing his bank card to the cashier. "Thank you. I'll pay you back," she whispered. Without pausing his conversation, he shook his head. "Take it out of my first paycheck, then." Understanding passed between them. Then he nodded. With the transaction completed, she crumpled the bag under her arm and popped off the tags, then followed him out to the car. Once they were both in, he thrust the car into gear. They rode in relative silence out of the city. Lainey watched him shift the car. There was just something so incredibly manly, sexy, but she didn't think those words, about watching a man shift a well-made machine. The gear shift became an extension of his hand. His whole body was in tune with his car, the body and the engine working together. Monsieur Clermont's jaw flexed a few times when he glanced at the time on the computer-filled dashboard, lit with all sorts of gadgets and electric things. The phone rang. A light blinked on his dash, and a sultry woman's voice announced the name of the caller, Sergei Bassini. Pronto, Monsieur Clermont said, speaking in fluid, Italian? While listening to a conversation in Italian, she traced a finger over the silver Gran Turismo embossed on the leather dash. He hung up. Maserati, he said. She shot him a questioning glance. She didn't speak Italian. A faint hint of a smile spread across his lips. Men. Whatever. She vowed to search the internet for Gran Turismo as soon as possible. We don't have to speak English, she said. We can speak French if you want. I have heard you speak French. He peeked over his designer shades. The corners of his mouth twitched in a smile. Or she imagined it. English is fine. But I should practice. Comme vous voulez. As you wish, a concession, but in formal French. An aura of suave sophistication surrounded him, a drive underneath his cool facade, very different from Aaron, who expressed, loudly, every thought, every grievance aired. Monsieur Clermont seemed focused, controlled, emotions pinned inside a cool facade. She shouldn't compare Mr. Clermont to her ex. For the first time, Lainey would witness what hid behind those great gray doors. Monsieur Clermont excused himself for other important errands when Sabine retrieved her from the lobby and escorted her through the barrier to the unknown. On the other side of the door, the office bustled with compact excitement. Lainey caught snatches of French as people passed by in twos or threes, discussing charts and graphs. Up the elevator to the 4th floor, Sabine led her to a large room filled with a labyrinth of gray flannel-lined cubicles. A general buzz of productivity rose from the invisible faces tucked in the 4 sets of squares. At the corner where 2 breezeways intersected, Sabine stopped at an L-shaped notch cut from a cubicle to make way for a pillar. Next to the pillar sat a 2-foot by 3-foot desk, nearly spilling out into the perpendicular breezeway. A laptop sat on the desk. "This is your place." She gestured toward the desk. In the middle of a cubicle hall? Certainly not the glorious spot she had envisioned. But it was only until she earned a position in chocolate, she reminded herself. Keep an eye on chocolate. Monsieur Clermont said I have an assignment? It's on your desktop, she said. Department meeting will be in 1 hour in the conference room. Where's the conference room? Instead of answering, she swiveled, leaving in a cloud of perfume. Clearly, someone needed to eat more chocolate. Lainey seated herself at the desk and opened the laptop lid. She should at least search for the assignment, or email Sabine or Monsieur Clermont for more details. Browser. Her eyes flit to each icon. No browser. She found a LAN email client with a staff email list embedded in an address book. That was it. No outside internet at all. How would she contact her family? She cleared her throat. This would be more difficult than she thought. She emailed Sabine asking about the assignment and the location of the conference room, then waited for a response. A few minutes passed. She resumed searching for an assignment. She clicked on each icon. Everything was in French except a few trade names of programs. After clicking around, she decided it must be hidden somewhere and threw up her hands in exasperation. A whole hour wasted. Without anything to do in the few minutes before the meeting, she ran to the bathroom. When she returned to her desk, a small red box with a bow sat in the corner. She glanced around to see if the giver was nearby. Maybe it was a welcome gift from Alpine Foods, but since she worked in a nook, not even a real cubicle, it seemed improbable. But who knew what kind of company policies they had? She tugged the ribbon and cracked open the red velvet box with a creak, searching for clues of the giver. Inside, a wristwatch circled around a form. She cocked her head and glanced at the watch she bought at Shopko with a green faux leather band. Ugly, but extremely functional. She gazed at the new one, an all stainless steel face etched with flowers and set 10 minutes early. She flipped it over for the price tag. 250 Swiss francs. Who would send such a gift? She already had a watch. Besides, the new one was too expensive to wear. She clamped the case closed with a snap and moved it to a corner on her desk. Only a few more minutes until the meeting. A door opened at the far side of the room. Over the top of the cubicles, she spied a group of men threading their way through the room. Monsieur Clermont's dark hair stood out among the white-haired men. There was an unmistakable power about him, confidence. His gaze met Lainey's. He tapped his watch, raising a questioning eyebrow. She shook her head. She hadn't forgotten about the meeting. It was in 10 minutes. Maybe everybody here arrived early. He frowned and stalked out the door. Maybe he expected her to follow him. She hesitated, then headed for the doors, following the direction of the pack of men. Once through the doorway, she searched for the group. At the end of the hall, the trailing pack rounded the corner. She followed them into a double-doored room with soft leather chairs around a long, sleek, dark, giant chocolate bar table. She entered the room. Every man and the 2 women craned their necks to stare at her. Je suis désolée que je suis en retard. She apologized for being late, casting her eyes around for an empty seat.
Who is this girl and why is she here?
A voice boomed from a large man seated at the head of the table. Several men reassured him.
I want her out of here.
One of the women nodded obsequiously. Monsieur Clermont swiveled in his chair and raised his eyebrows in surprise. Scowling, he jumped up from his seat and with haste tugged her out of the room. His impetuous move disoriented Lainey. Her face burned with comprehension. Not the conference room, not her meeting. Heat emanated from her shirt. Once alone in the hall, Monsieur Clermont dropped her arm, but her eyes couldn't meet his. Je suis... She wanted to say an idiot, but he cut her off in English. It's okay. J'allais à la salle des conférences? Giving up, she continued in English, dropping her gaze to the floor. Sabine said I had a department meeting in some conference room, but she didn't say which conference room. I emailed her, but she never responded. Ah! The hard lines of his face softened with understanding. Follow me. He swiveled, heading down the hall, outpacing her. She caught up with him. He gave her a sideways glance. You are not wearing the watch I sent you. You? For some reason her face flamed again. But I already have a watch. She raised a wrist to show him. You need a Swiss timepiece. Yours, he nodded at her Shopko special, was probably made in China. Here we are. He stopped at a door labeled Department of Pet Care. Dread filled her heart as she entered the room. With a few last words of departure, Monsieur Clermont closed the heavy wooden door behind him with finality. She wanted to cling to him, to beg him to take her to the chocolate department. But instead, she summoned her strength and faced the gathered crowd. Sabine sat at the head of the table, her ping-pong ball-sized eyes glaring at Lainey. 2 men and a blonde woman faced each other at a U-shaped table. Sabine introduced them. The tall blonde, Britta, with a last name only a German could pronounce, was the production manager. She nodded her head slightly in acknowledgement, as if her angled body might shatter with any further movement. Opposite her, the 2 men, Luc Pessereau, with a large forehead, was stats and cost analysis. The thicker Guy Mouchet, director of marketing and advertising, sat on his right. Luc spoke flawless, sing-song French as he presented material with graphs and charts. His hair was slicked back, exposing his full forehead, 50s hoodlum style. Reviewing the detailed graphs, I can't help but wonder, is this strategy the best one? Wouldn't it make more sense to produce products similar to our competitors, rather than experimental innovations which may not work? Sabine deferred. Yves makes those decisions. The hoodlum asked several questions during his presentation of the statistics. The clock ticked. Lainey fought the jet lag weighing on her eyelids. When Monsieur Clermont comes, Sabine said at last. As if on cue, and precisely 1 hour from the time he left, Yves Clermont burst through the doors. Bonjour, bonjour. The whole atmosphere in the room changed. His incredible energy infused everyone. Britta and Sabine sat up straighter. Lainey recognized the sound before it came into view. A shudder filtered through her heart as if pricked with shards of glass. A dog. With a leash, Monsieur Clermont led a playful, mid-sized dog with a short, dark coat into the room. Lainey jumped up, spilling her chair behind her. She swallowed. Closing her eyes, she focused on her breathing and remembered her 8 years of therapy with jovial cat lover Elsie Bly. She had sat and stroked a cat sculpture on her desk as they talked. Lainey imagined Elsie's voice in her head. Dogs aren't out to get you, Lainey. Most of them just want to play. She needed to get over it, but not today. With a shaking hand, Lainey righted her chair, worried the rest of the team had viewed her panic. Instead, they focused on the dog at the front of the room. Lainey sat, drawing her legs up to her chest. She needed chocolate. This is Fouté, Monsieur Clermont announced, parading the prancing dog around. Maybe in pet care, people brought their dogs to work. Lainey gauged the others' reactions, but they were equally astonished. Guy and Luc exchanged glances. Fouté, the black dog with a tuxedo patch of white on its chest, captured everyone's attention. It pranced around, biting at the leash. It barked. Lainey jumped in her seat, heart pounding. Unleashing the dog, Monsieur Clermont and Fouté danced a pas de deux as he enticed the dog by letting it chase him in a circle after a treat he held in his hand. Then Monsieur Clermont crouched to hug its neck, scratching behind its ears, and rewarded Fouté with a treat. His enjoyment and affection for the dog were strangely attractive. Lainey almost wanted to join him, if he wasn't so close to mandibles of death. The blonde, Britta, finally smiled. "He's cute." Monsieur Clermont continued to talk while playing with the dog. "I borrowed him for today." From his pocket he extracted another treat, asked Fute to sit, then rewarded the dog when it complied. "Good boy." He patted its head. From another pocket he retrieved a bone and set it in front of Fute, who held it between his forepaws to gnaw. Lainey held her breath. Teeth, scraping bone. If she ever needed chocolate, now was the time. Monsieur Clermont faced them for a few seconds, waiting expectantly. Nobody moved. They all watched. Finally, he spoke again. "Isn't someone going to come up here and pet the dog? Ask me questions about my friend here?" His subordinates shifted awkwardly in their seats. Lainey was frozen, staring wide-eyed at the dog. Monsieur Clermont squatted near the dog, stroking his coat. "Can anyone tell me what breed of dog Fute is?" No answer. His brow creased. "He's a greater Swiss mountain dog." He paused. "What kind of food would you recommend for a 1-year-old dog?" Again, silence. Monsieur Clermont grew impatient. "How many of you are pet owners?" No hands. "None of you?" He shook his head. "I have a bird," Guy said, but Monsieur Clermont ignored him. "How can we sell pet food if none of you have any understanding?" Britta nervously clicked her pen, then realized it made noise and stopped. "I want all of you to come out of your seats and introduce yourself to Fute. Don't worry, he's a friendly dog." Britta complied first, then Sabine hesitantly. Britta folded herself in half, then her knees popped as she squatted to be level with the dog. Fute raised his head at the approach and relished the scratches behind the ears. Next, Sabine awkwardly bent and patted the dog. Then the two guys rose in slow motion, as if it pained them to leave their chairs, pushed in their seats, and strolled up to the dog with hands in their pockets. The larger of the two, Guy, waved from about a foot away. "Hello, doggy." Luc, with the slicked hair, gave a short pat to the head, then stuck his hands back in his pockets. They formed an uncomfortable circle around the dog. Then Monsieur Clermont stared at Lainey. "Mademoiselle Peterson?" She returned his stare. "Are you coming to greet Fute?" She shook her head, not wanting to explain to all her new co-workers her history. "Is there something wrong?" At Monsieur Clermont's question, they all stared at her. She chewed her lip, her face burning. "I hate dogs," she whispered. Monsieur Clermont scrutinized her through slitted eyes, as if he had allowed a wolf in among his sheep. Lainey needed chocolate, and she needed it now. "Go ahead and sit down," he said at last. They dispersed. Monsieur Clermont led Fute to the door, where someone escorted him out into the hall. Lainey breathed when the dog left, relaxing. Chocolate. She needed chocolate. Thoroughly embarrassed, Lainey glanced to where Monsieur Clermont stood at the front of the room, staring intently at her. "Everyone has met our new intern, Elaine Peterson, n'est-ce pas?" Monsieur Clermont clapped his hands together. "Bon, I think we are out of touch with our customers. I will think about how to solve this problem." "But we have surveys and statistics," Luc protested. "They tell us what we think to ask, but we don't even know what to ask. I want to know what they really want. We need to probe deeper. How can we find out more about their needs?" No one said anything. Lainey raised her hand. Why don't we just ask them? Guy sniggered and Luke rolled his eyes. Maybe her suggestion was too obvious. Her face warmed in embarrassment. Excellent idea, Mademoiselle Peterson. Monsieur Clermont clapped his hands. Bon, I will think more on this. Until next week. He adjourned the meeting. On her way out the door, Sabine detained her by loading her with a pile of folders and directions to enter the data. When the beam of her two big eyes finally glanced away, Lainey darted through the door. Returning to her desk, Lainey passed a wall of windows facing the front walk and gardens. Monsieur Clermont stood on the grass, his suit flapping in the wind off the lake. He was pointing out different bushes and flowers to the groundskeeper next to a garden cart loaded with tools. Nothing was below his notice. He directed everything, even the gardening. At her desk, Lainey juggled the paperwork, finding room for it all on her desk, and reanalyzed the French. Then she saw it. A pair of 3-foot-long hooked bypass loppers came through the gray maze, held above some unseen head. It attracted the attention of several cubicle dwellers who popped up their heads like gophers. Some even followed the pair of loppers as the tool danced in the air through the maze, drawing closer and finally stopping at Lainey's desk. Monsieur Clermont peeked from behind the loppers. Your watch, mademoiselle. His eyes flashed with seriousness, his lips in a straight line. Lainey stuck out her hand in utter amazement. He slipped one curved tine under her faux leather straps and with a snip, cut it in two. It fell to her desk with a clank. On the back it said, Made in China. The crowd whispered among themselves. He held out his hand to the red velvet box. Please oblige me by wearing the Swiss watch. With her eyes rooted to him, she released the watch from the box. When she fumbled with the latch, she glanced down. In a swift movement, he dropped the loppers, trapping them between his knees, and bent to help her. His soft touch warmed her skin. Now you have an appropriate and functioning watch. He held her wrist for a split second longer than necessary. Tucking the loppers under his arm, he pivoted, strode through the parting crowd, and disappeared behind the doors. At the end of the day, the airline brought her bag. Lainey lugged it to the bathroom to slip on fresh undies, but all her lacy underwear was missing. Before investigating further, Lainey jumped when her phone buzzed with a text from Monsieur Clermont. Meet me in my office ASAP. Dread grew from her shoulders to the base of her neck. Inside his office, Mary Claire from Human Resources sat in a chair while he stood behind the desk. Have a seat, he said in French. She sat next to Mary Claire. Lainey gulped. You need a place to stay, yes? Monsieur Clermont stood surveying the stunning view of the Dent du Midi over Lake Geneva. The sun peeked over the mountains, leaving beams of sunlight streaming through the clouds. Yes? Mary Claire has volunteered to let you room with her. She stole a glance at Mary Claire and swore an oath in her heart to be the best roommate. But then, when was rooming with a coworker ever a smart idea? You can move in this weekend. Mary Claire gave Lainey a scrap of paper with her address, 57 Avenue du Général Guisin, almost across the street. Before leaving the office, she glanced back at Monsieur Clermont to thank him, but he had already gone back to working at his desk.